Welcome to Interdependent Study, our podcast where we engage in the learning and unlearning work for collective liberation. I'm Damien.
And I'm Aaron. Thank you so much for joining us today. Each week, we'll bring something new to the table and discuss our thoughts and feelings about it through the lenses of who we are and where we can go for a more just society.
We want Interdependent Study to be a space where we're always learning with one another. And Aaron is up this week. Ooh. What are you bringing to the table today?
Well, we are bringing Radical Unlearning, the art and science of creating change from within. Because as I covered last week, it's, according to the schedule, my turn to bring something to the table, but it's your book month.
Yes.
And so to coincide with October and the release of Radical Unlearning, we're releasing this episode.
Yes.
On this date, which lands on my turn to bring something to the table.
That's right.
But we're sharing it.
Everybody's caught up.
Yeah. We are bringing this to the table.
Huh?
The book is written by Lewis Raven Wallace and published by Beacon Press, and it came out on October 28th,
Ooh.
which, if you're listening to this on release day, was yesterday.
Yes.
For those keeping tabs at home, go grab yourself a copy of this brand new book. It's really powerful and brings together a lot of science-based evidence alongside movement-based work and profound life-changing unlearning experiences that people have. And Lewis explores, quote, love, cognitive dissonance, community, confrontation, questions, somatics, poetry, and surrealism, immersion, and accessibility as practices that create the conditions for unlearning. That lays out basically all the chapters in the book.
It sure does.
And they say, quote, radical unlearning happens when we begin to reach the roots of thought, belief, and action, when we see ourselves, either suddenly or over time, as vulnerable creatures whose ideological frames and tacit assumptions might be leading us to complicity in systems and worlds we don't want to build. And there's so much in that illuminates the ways that different people have reached within themselves to disrupt the internalized systemic traditions and worldview to find a new path that gives us more opportunities for life.
Yes.
And I think that's enough for my introduction. So where do you want to start as someone who is also bringing this book to the table?
I have brought this book as well. Well, I'll start by agreeing with you that this was a very powerful book, and I'm really grateful that Beacon Press was willing to give us an advance copy of it to be able to read and talk about on the podcast.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah, many thanks to Beacon Press for this opportunity. And thank you, Lewis Raven Wallace, for writing it. I was really moved by this book for so many reasons. In particular, I was moved by the stories that Lewis shared in this book from the interviews that they conducted that were featured in basically every single chapter. The folks that they talked to were really vulnerable with what they shared, and it opened my eyes to the possibilities that exist when you embrace radical unlearning as a practice in your everyday life, right? When you actively work to unlearn those knee-jerk reactions, when you unlearn those harmful feedback loops, when you unlearn supremacist ideologies, when you do all of that, it can lead you on this path to personal reflection and transformation. And I think there's incredible collective possibility in that and from that as well, which I think we need now more than ever. Just turn on the news. So to that point, one of the things Lewis says in the introductory chapter is this, quote, in order to fight fascism and racism and create just global societies, we must embrace unlearning as a collective practice available to all of us. We must be willing to be unsettled and eager to help others rethink. We must pursue and make real the hope that transformative unlearning is possible. And they go on a little bit later to say, quote, unlearning is a skill that in itself can be taught, learned, practiced, and protected. Rather than orienting towards how we sway others to right beliefs, radical unlearning proposes thinking about how we create communities, organizations, and spaces that allow for curious dissection of tough questions and that encourage compassionate rethinking. And that, to me, is just a really powerful argument for radical unlearning.
Yeah.
It's certainly, I think, work that we need to do as individuals, but it's also deeply rooted in community and in service to and of our collective liberation. And, I think Lewis really hammered that home in the introductory chapter, and it definitely carried its way through the entire book.
Yeah, absolutely. The introduction was great in laying the foundation for what was going to happen.
Yes.
And it which is what introductions typically do.
Yeah.
But I thought this did a really great job of really laying out all of it.
Absolutely.
So one of the pieces of the book that I've mentioned a little bit already, but was really interesting to me, was the neuroscience that Lewis brought in to the concept of unlearning.
Yeah.
They use a concept to illustrate this point called desire lines, which I'll quote Lewis to actually explain. Quote, unlearning might be thought of as carving out a new desire line, abandoning the paved sidewalks and modern grids of oppressive teachings and learnings. It is a form of learning, but learning requires us to redirect old patterns, to recognize that we have been following a rigid pathway and choose another way. It's learning against the grain of dominant ideology and paradigms, learning to recognize and follow pathways that reflect where we want to go rather than what we've been told or pressured into, or what we have absorbed by osmosis, which I thought was really powerful as a metaphor. And so desire lines are these new pathways that people make that are shortcuts through a park that aren't paved yet, or they're paths that people want to see but aren't yet created. And Lewis goes on to explore another concept from science by saying, quote, neuroplasticity describes the fundamental malleability and changeability of brain functions, not just our ability to learn new tasks or process new information, although that is part of it, but our ability to rearrange the circuitry guiding certain activities and reactions in our minds. Of course, these Western academic traditions of biological and medical science are just a series of ever-changing theories, and frequently these theories come full circle and collide with theories of health and medicine that have existed in other parts of the globe for thousands of years. Whole body healing, somatics, meditation, yoga, and therapies involve pressure points, touch, ritual, and light. All of these work with human neuroplasticity and the ability to train and retrain our minds. So in that sense, neuroplasticity is not a discovery at all, just a different way into something people have known about for millennia. I love this concept of neuroplasticity because it recognizes that physically we change with that. And so if you connect that to the desire lines metaphor, when we find a new pathway in between what we've already paved in our minds, so to speak, there's a new connection that's created. There's a new pathway made. And I think, understanding that and connecting neuroplasticity to what we've known for millennia in different ways, I think is a really powerful way to understand it, and to understand that we're finding new ways to talk about it. We're finding new ways to think about what unlearning and what learning is beyond that. And so I really like to think about how these traditions are connected to the science, and the science is helping to explain why the traditions have been helpful, but it doesn't make the traditions less than what they are.
Right. Yeah.
So I love bringing that in just as an example of how sort of Western science and medicine sometimes is catching up to wisdom that has been known for a long time. And it doesn't diminish either one in my mind necessarily, but they're connected.
Absolutely. Well, and I also appreciated that desire lines metaphor because, it was really simple to understand when you think about it. And just thinking about the idea of taking a new path somewhere and learning that path. Like if I've always taken this path to work, but I then start going this way, eventually my mind will recognize this new path. And it was like, that makes a lot of sense. And so, the science behind all of this was really fascinating to learn about and to understand more about neuroplasticity as a concept and its connection to this learning and unlearning. And I thought, it gave the book, not that it necessarily needed this, but it gave the book and the concept of radical unlearning some teeth and rigor for me in a way that I think, some folks might need to buy into this, if you will. Love that you brought that up. Moving a little bit deeper into the book, I was moved by the chapter on community. Lewis interviews a former white supremacist named Adrian Black, whose godfather was David Duke, who is well known as one of the leaders of the KKK. And so Adrian's story was incredible and riveting to learn more about and to learn from if you don't know their story and all of that. Lewis does a really great job in capturing it in this chapter. But I want to share part of what Lewis offers about the power of community and the work of radical unlearning. So Lewis says that community is, quote, the heart of learning, the heart, perhaps, of everything that matters, being together in community and connection, which is both a birthright and an experience that dominant capitalist cultures deny or destroy access to. The feeling of the happiness hotel is so much like the feeling of a blues band playing on a street corner, which is so much like the feeling of an open-air market in Palestine, which is so much like the feeling of a gay pride in Madrid. There's connection, safety in numbers, life taken to the brass tacks, music, bodies, laughter, food. And yet these are essential ingredients, essential conditions for letting go of preconceived notions, whether it's so we can become who we are or so we can act differently in solidarity with others. As my friend and collaborator Mia Henry likes to say, quote, everything important we do is done with other people, unquote. Unlearning is no exception, and simply entering a community where we feel belonging can suddenly make impossible changes within us feel possible or even joyful. A lot of the social science research into why people take up or express certain views focuses on a particular framing, one that might be summarized as peer pressure. Countless studies show that people are social, that we do what others want us to do and believe what others around us seem to believe, and that we also gravitate toward people who seem to share our beliefs. Sometimes this is also described in the negative as mob mentality or groupthink. On the one hand, the social scientists might lead us to conclude that people are natural conformists, which also means that authoritarian or bigoted views are easy to pull over on people. On the other hand, that research reveals a social, interconnected element to both learning and unlearning. I loved all of that, and I thought Adrian Black's story was a powerful example and case study of all of that. But I also think we can see this in what we're living through right now in this year being 2025. And for me, I was really moved in this chapter by the idea that there's real power in community. We've talked about that a lot here on this podcast. You know, there's love in community, there's accountability in community, there's possibility for a better and more just society in embracing community as a condition within our radical unlearning work and the work that's necessary when we're doing this together, when we recognize each other's humanity. Like there's so much power in that. And so this chapter really got me.
Yeah, I think that the Adrian story is incredible because they attended a college that was a progressive college. Mm-hmm. It's actually been taken over by DeSantis's cronies in Florida recently. So we'll see how it evolves over time, I guess. If evolve is even the correct term for that.
Yeah.
But they were sort of pushed by community to recognize that what they had been taught, what they had learned about people of color, about LGBT people, about immigrants, about Jewish people was all nonsense.
Yes.
And her story is a powerful one.
Yeah.
In that.
And to be challenged in that way to reconsider their viewpoints because it's like, oh, these are my friends and they believe something so very different than what I believe. And maybe I should take a moment and consider that.
Right. and that reconsidering being grounded in the relationship that they want to maintain with that person.
Absolutely. That community.
It was really powerful.
Absolutely.
So another element that I really appreciated was this tension, I guess, that Lewis points out between accessibility and making things easy, which then removes the rigor of the work or the practice.
Yeah.
So they say, quote, to this end, accessibility cannot be the opposite of rigor. Making something accessible is not the same as making it easy. On the contrary, we need accessible pedagogies of unlearning that can keep up with the rigor of the powerful. Of course, these pedagogies and practices exist and have existed around the world. Some of them have names in English: pedagogy of the oppressed, theater of the oppressed, popular education, politicized somatics, but many of them do not. And our human imaginations and cultures can absolutely outpace technology, not least because we are creative, strange, and surreal. Where computers can only solve problems, people in groups can experiment, hallucinate, and play. We can push outside the borders of rational thought, and that is where radical unlearning is uniquely formidable. The visionary and playful and love-based aspects of radical unlearning can't be reproduced outside of their context in communities and relationships. which means they can't be reproduced by machines. We will always have a leg up on the conditioning and propaganda produced by capitalists. And it can also be much more fun to swim in these waters than trudge through their muck. I love that for a lot of reasons. The metaphor at the end of swimming through the waters versus trudging through their muck is great. And one of the other things that I really appreciate was the way that Lewis points out that our collective creativity and strangeness and how that will always be able to create new pathways that challenge systems of oppression.
Absolutely.
And I also thought, as I read that again right now, that we will always outpace technology because we're creating the technology collectively. So we're always going to be a step ahead in a sense.
Yes.
At least fingers crossed. I believe we always will be a step ahead in that. And I think the other piece of that I really appreciate is that sometimes we shy away from the difficulty of things because it's hard.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But maybe it should be hard. So I spent some time with someone recently who met Paulo Freire, who wrote Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which is also named here.
Yeah.
And in a session, Freire was asked why his writing is so hard to read, almost with like a sort of pointed way.
Yeah.
Like it's not accessible was the undertone. And he said, and I'm paraphrasing, probably a paraphrase here, that the rigor of the text is important. Reading should be hard. And I think that's true, especially when we're thinking about unlearning and when we're thinking about needing to drive home a point that is upending conventional thinking.
Yeah.
Because when we're reading something that's easy, we're sort of filling in the blanks almost, or the context that we're reading that in is the conventional wisdom that's undergirding it. It's the stuff that we need to unlearn. And that's why I think his text is challenging, is that it's undoing some of the learning that we've taken in. It's challenging the foundations of it.
Right.
And so, like the diction, the word choice that he has might be more challenging, especially across the translation, because it wasn't written in English.
Oh, right. Yeah.
But it's more than that too. It's also the idea is attacking and undermining directly the pedagogy of the oppressor.
Yeah.
And so if that's what we know, that's what we've been brought up in, it makes it harder to digest,
Yeah, it can
I
be
think.
challenging.
And so the rigor there then is powerful and it's necessary.
It's absolutely necessary. And I think that applies to a lot of things. I feel like, work is supposed to be hard. Our learning is supposed to be difficult. It's supposed to challenge us. It's supposed to stretch us in many ways. And certainly radical unlearning work is work and it takes real effort. And so, that's awesome. What a cool celebrity sighting for your friend or interaction for your friend, your colleague. But all of this, to me, has made this book so beautiful and important. There was a ton of brilliance, and it's hard to say that because it's brilliance all throughout this book. Yeah. There's a ton of brilliance in the chapter on confrontation. And so that chapter focused a lot on unlearning white supremacy. And I appreciated Lewis's vulnerability in talking about their own work to unlearn supremacist views and ways of thinking and being. And I think there's a lot of us, but especially white people, who can learn from Lewis's vulnerability and analysis about all of that. How you have to learn to breathe through the tough moments. How you need to learn to not take yourself too seriously when things get tough. How you learn to respond to feedback. And I think most importantly, how important it is to show up whole and how to actively listen in conversations and when you're doing the work.
Yeah.
And, there was just some really brilliant and helpful stuff there. In the chapter, Lewis also shared a really powerful metaphor for what unlearning is and what's necessary when doing it, and also shared their personal reflections about it. So they said, quote, "Unlearning is a process of peeling back layer upon layer, circling back to what we think we know and questioning why we believe it, trying to recover and respect gut feelings, while also challenging ingrained biases. We cannot trust our gut. We must trust our gut. We cannot change. We need to change. I continually make mistakes and stumble through ideas, and I'm continually surprised by the nature of the lessons in their wake. I feel small, like a new person to the world, childlike in ways that can be wondrous or alarming. It's as if I thought I was learning to climb, but what's required is swimming. I thought I was breathing air, but I'm diving underwater." And, speaking of metaphors, like the one you just had, like I love that idea of like, I thought I was going in to climb, but I'm in water, I'm swimming. And so all of it to me was just a really powerful metaphor and even visual about what this work is all about and what you need to be prepared to do. And again, I just love all of we haven't talked a lot about other stories that, from the folks that Lewis interviewed, but I also really appreciate the ways in which Lewis was vulnerable and shared their own journey in this book as another case study to learn from.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of interviews, and then there's also a lot of self-work.
Yes.
And it's a powerful weaving of a lot of different methods that reminded me in some ways of Begin Again, the book about James Baldwin.
Yes.
And the way that Eddie Glaude sort of blurred the lines of memoir and, well, memoir might not be the right word, but personal reflection and also like a biography and a textual exploration of James Baldwin's work. It's a blurring of methodologies that I usually appreciate a lot in books.
And did here as well, right?
Yeah. All right, well, let's talk about application. So thinking about metaphors in particular, I think application is a great way for us to transition. So how do we apply this book to our continued learning and unlearning work? One of the things that I really appreciated was the discussion of community and how communities can hold space, which you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
For unlearning and do that in really powerful ways. So Lewis drives this point home again in the conclusion by saying, quote, unlearning sometimes happens in a cascade of events in a community or society, especially when this rethinking shakes the power structures to its core. There's safety in numbers, and unlearning in groups is much more efficient than studying in a room alone until you come to something. Such a collective cascade is what we often call a movement. Women's liberation, for example, or the American Indian movement, or the movements of the 1990s and 2000s for trans liberation, were each based on a broad collective unlearning that might have felt sudden to bystanders, but was driven by a long pent-up truth finally being told in public. And for me, it's a continued reminder for all of us to find a place in movement work. Summon a little extra energy to speak out on your liberatory values in public somehow, whether that's small scale with your family or neighbors, and thinking about connecting back to Adrian Black's story.
Yes.
There's power in those individual relationships that we hold and that we build. And we also know that that's where change actually happens, is in relationship.
Yes.
People don't change because of facts. They change because the relationship they have with somebody challenges the facts that they have.
Yes.
Or that they think that they have. Or neighbors at work. There are all these places that we have intimate connections with people and relationships. And then there's also bigger scale through organizations, whether that's local, regional, national, what have you. And there's always a space for us to find something to do.
Right.
And I think that right now, as we're staring down SNAP benefits expiring because of the government shutdown on November 1st, there's going to be a lot of impact directly on people, and there's going to be a lot of ripple impact across communities because of the work that money does in communities, in our local economies. And so there's going to be a lot of, I think, demand and space for people to be doing work in their communities. There has been for a long time, but I think there's going to be a little bit more in the coming weeks. And so, yeah, I encourage us all to find ways we can fit in and contribute to people being fed.
Absolutely. That's beautiful, man.
Yeah, thank you. Well, what about you?
Yeah. Well, I love that application. We talked about how great the introduction was. The conclusion did such a beautiful job in weaving all of the threads and the analysis together and making sense of it all. And that quote in particular from the conclusion, I think connects really well to the community chapter that we talked about earlier. So I love all of that. There's something else, actually. So my application is also from the conclusion. I thought this was a really great application and actually connects kind of nicely to what you just brought. So Lewis says, quote, unlearning is a cyclical process that exists within and responds to material conditions. Oppressive societies are quite effective at controlling and preventing the conditions for unlearning, teaching us instead to distrust and fear each other, to undervalue poetry and overvalue so-called national thought, to disconnect from our embodied experience and intuition, and to accept our own and others' deprivation. It follows that another way to create conditions for unlearning is to directly challenge and change power relations. Lots of people don't explore unlearning simply because they fear the punishing consequences, especially in authoritarian or fascist societies or situations. In this way, unlearning is facilitated as much by confrontational interactions, protest, and pressure, as by patient and loving interactions between friends. Changing power relations can be necessary to unlearning, as unlearning can be necessary to changing power relations. And I really appreciated that because we are living in said fascist, authoritarian, and oppressive times.
Yeah.
And it's really scary out there right now for so many of us. And in reality, it's scary for all of us, whether or not you recognize it or feel it quite yet. And you talked about what's coming really soon that might impact a lot of our communities and our people. Mm-hmm. And so all of this, and I think this entire book, is a way forward in a way for us to hopefully defeat the moment we're in right now.
Yeah, and that your quote, I think, reminds me too and connects to what I talked about with finding place in movement. And I think finding place in movement, I don't think we've done I will speak for myself. I haven't done a great job of talking about that. Involves assessing your risk levels. How much risk do you want to take because of that fear of the fascist and authoritarian regimes and what punishment might look like in your action against them. And so it's powerful. Assess your risk. Like, what can you do, and what do you have to draw a line at? Because that's necessary to figure out where you can go and what it is you can do and where you can fit in.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, great stuff for application.
Yeah.
Let's talk about homework. What do we want to do to continue our learning and unlearning work beyond our conversation today? Lewis has written at least one other book. I think one other book, but at least one other book. And that's called The View from Somewhere, Undoing the Myth of Journalistic Objectivity, which was published in 2019 and, quote, is a book about fierce journalists who have pursued truth and transparency and sometimes been punished for it, not just by tyrannical governments, but by journalistic institutions themselves.
Wow.
Which sounds really, really interesting.
Yeah.
And another piece of homework that pops up for me is a book that was mentioned a couple of times in this book, and that's called How to Have Anti-Racist Conversations, Embracing Our Full Humanity to Challenge White Supremacy, which is by Roxy Manning, who is a clinical psychologist and trainer with the Center for Nonviolent Communication.
Yeah.
And that book is grounded in Dr. King's beloved community framework and, quote, fuels courage and provides tools to confront everyday forms of racism. Both of these sound really great.
Yeah.
It would be great to dive into. So those are my homework. Maybe we'll get to them one day.
Yeah.
What's yours?
I love all of that. Very good. My homework is to do all I can to promote this book from our platform because I just think it's such a beautiful and powerful and useful book in this moment. And again, thank you, Lewis, for writing it. I think there's so much we can all learn from it.
Absolutely.
And so I want to do all I can to help push it out into the world. You talked about the science of neuroplasticity earlier. One of the books that Lewis references about neuroplasticity is Norman Doidge's The Brain That Changes Itself. And so I thought that might be a good book to check out too, to continue our learning there. Because again, I think we were both really fascinated by that, the science behind all of this. And then we didn't talk too much about this, but you mentioned it. In this book, Lewis includes some great reflection questions at the end of almost all of the chapters, not all, but almost all. And so those would be really great to go through and to actually, put into practice and to engage in some of that personal reflection about, how we engage in this radical unlearning, right? And how we put it into practice. And so we didn't get to really talk about those too much. We probably could have done two episodes on this book. Maybe should have. But, that's another reason why this book is so powerful, because Lewis also gives us some resources to do this work. So, I'd love to go back and check those out as well.
And there's a fully fledged, I think they called it an unpresentation.
Oh, yeah.
Outline for a full workshop.
Yes,
so that would be great to go back and check out as well. All right. Well, that's it for our conversation about radical unlearning for this week. And Damien, you're up next time. What do you bring to the table in our next episode?
So I am going to bring us back to the Inquest series that we've been talking about the past couple of months. That Inquest series is called Abolitionist Lessons from the Prison Belt. It's a 6-part series by Lydia Pellet-Hobbs, Judah Shep, Craig Gilmore, and Ruth Wilson Gilmore. And so we're on the 3rd part of this 6-part series, and that is called Custody and Power. And the sort of summary statement about what this is about is, quote, "Those wishing to abolish prisons must understand the legal and financial mechanisms through which the carceral state organizes itself to hold people against their will." And that in and of itself sounds really powerful. And so I'm excited for us to get back to this series. We've been doing some great work to finish out series this year. So let's work our way through this Inquest series. And I'm looking forward to reading this one and talking about it with you next time.
Me too. Those have been really great so far. So always looking forward to diving back into those.
Yes.
All right. Well, with that, we want to thank you for joining us today. You know what I'm going to ask you to do here, but in case you forgot, please follow, leave a rating and review, share our podcast with the people in your life. Follow us on social media, including Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. Check us out on YouTube and sign up and join us on Patreon to get notified about any new things we've got going on behind the scenes.
Yes. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, it's not about us, but it is about all of us. We'll talk to you next week.